The cafe was unusually still that morning. Not with peace, but with the kind of silence born from unease. Conversations were hushed, movements careful. The waiters and baristas glided about quietly, and even the espresso machine seemed to hum more softly than usual. All because he was there. At the window table sat Richard Carrington. A name that carried both admiration and dread throughout the city. A millionaire businessman, not famous for his generosity, but for his temper, arrogance, and impossible expectations. His presence hung over the cafe like a storm cloud, casting a shadow that dimmed every smile. Everyone knew the stories. How he had driven employees to tears, humiliated managers in front of customers, and once made a barista quit after a single complaint. People feared him, and rightly so. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the courage to stand up for what's right, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Stories of Kindness. Your support helps us bring you more inspiring, life-changing tales. That morning, Richard was in one of his infamous moods. Clad in a crisp navy suit and a flawlessly knotted tie, he sat tapping his fingers against the marble table, his sharp eyes scanning the cafe for flaws no one else could see. The staff exchanged nervous glances, silently warning one another to be cautious. No one wanted to draw his ire. When his order arrived, his usual double espresso with a touch of cinnamon, it took less than a sip before his voice thundered across the room. "This coffee is a disgrace," he barked, the sound of his cup slamming onto the saucer echoing like a gunshot. Every customer froze mid-bite. The barista stiffened. The manager, a thin man with glasses who had endured Richard's tirades more times than he cared to count, hurried over, forcing a shaky smile and an apology. But Richard wasn't interested in apologies. He demanded to know who made the coffee, who approved it, and why the standards had sunk so low. His words sliced through the air. Cold, sharp, cruel. Behind the counter, a young barista, barely a month into the job, stood pale and trembling, his eyes fixed on the floor. And that's when she stepped in. Emily, the new waitress. She'd been there only a week and hadn't yet learned the unwritten rule. When Richard Carrington is in the room, you stay invisible. She had met rude customers before. But the way Richard tore into that young barista lit something inside her. Raised by a single mother who taught her that respect wasn't earned by wealth, but deserved by everyone, Emily couldn't stay silent. Holding a tray of steaming cappuccinos, she took a deep breath and walked toward his table. The cafe seemed to stop breathing. Every eye followed her. The other waiters looked horrified. No one ever confronted him, but Emily didn't falter. Setting her tray down on a nearby table, she stood tall and met Richard's gaze without fear. In a calm, steady voice, she told him that the way he was speaking to the staff was unacceptable. Silence. Absolute silence. Richard stared at her, stunned. No one had ever spoken to him like that. His face hardened, ready to unleash his fury. But Emily's voice remained unwavering. She reminded him that behind every cup of coffee stood a person doing their best. That mistakes happen, and that dignity should never be a luxury for the wealthy alone. She spoke without anger, but with undeniable truth. That his behavior revealed more about him than the coffee ever could. Her words landed with quiet power. The customers, who moments earlier had shrunk in fear, now looked at Emily with admiration. Richard's face flushed, but instead of erupting, he fell silent. Something in her tone, firm, respectful, unshaken, disarmed him. For the first time in years, he was faced not with fear, but with someone who refused to back down and yet didn't disrespect him. After a long moment, Richard leaned back in his chair and said simply, "Bring me a fresh cup." His voice was still sharp, but the venom was gone. Emily nodded, thanked him for his patience, and returned to the counter with the same quiet confidence she had walked in with. In the weeks that followed, something remarkable happened. Richard kept coming to the cafe. But he was different. Still demanding, still meticulous. But the cruelty had vanished. Sometimes he even offered small compliments. Something no one had ever heard from him before. Gradually, the tension that used to fill the cafe on his visits began to fade. And though Richard never said the words, "I'm sorry," everyone knew what had changed him. A young waitress had the courage to stand up for kindness. And in doing so, she transformed not only his attitude but the atmosphere of the entire place. Emily never sought praise. She continued her work with quiet grace, smiling at every customer, treating her coworkers with respect, and carrying herself with calm strength. Yet among the staff, she became something of a legend. Customers who had witnessed that day still spoke of it. Not as a moment of conflict, but as the day someone reminded them all that respect is a two-way street. As for Richard, he was never the friendliest man, but he began leaving generous tips. Not out of guilt, but perhaps as a silent nod to the respect he had finally learned to show. Sometimes, he even asked Emily for coffee recommendations. And when she spoke, he listened. For a man who had built his life on intimidating others into silence, that was a change no one could have predicted. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Stories of Kindness. These moments remind us that courage, compassion, and decency still have the power to change hearts. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever seen someone stand up for what's right, even against someone powerful? Share your story in the comments. It might just inspire someone today.